Okay, this is chapter five, Ed Psych, chapter five, part two, part two. I get kind of confusing with this, dividing chapter five into one and two. But chapter two is chapter five, part two is the most important chapter in the whole textbook because you use this stuff every day. And so this is the one that that's why I spend so much time on 12 pages because these are the most useful pages. Even if you're not going to be a teacher in psychology or just a parent or something, you're going to use behavior modification. Now, we left talking about reinforcement, positive, negative, and punishment. This part is about reinforcement. Remember, Skinner took Thorndike's law of effect, which was basically reinforcement, and ran with it. Um, there's two types of there's six types of reinforcement. One type is continuous. Continuous means 100% reinforcement. You reinforce every time. You always start out with continuous. Usually you continue with animals or stupid people because it's harder to do partial thing. But anyway, um, continuous you reinforce every time. Continuous is great for fast learning because you let the organism know exactly what you want. And two is initial learning. You should always start out with continuous, then go to partial reinforcement. The problem with continuous, what Skinner discovered was fast extinction. How many trials do you know this behavior they're not getting reinforced? One, right? If you reinforce every trial, it's like you play a slot machine in Vegas and you win the first three times. The fourth time you don't win, you go, it's the change of behavior. So it's fast extinction because if you reinforce every time, it takes you one trial to know you're not getting reinforced. The other problem is satiation. When that satiation is when reinforcement, you reinforce so much that the reinforcement is no longer reinforcing. If I gave you M&Ms after a while, you go, oh, I'm sick of M&Ms. I want more M&Ms. So it loses its reinforcement value. So that's one thing with continuous. You reinforce it every time. I don't care what it is. You know, you name something. If you get too much of it, it's not reinforcing. Um, Now you say, wait a second, that's one. Where's the other six? You said six. Where's the other five? Well, is um, um, partial is made up of four types, and the reason we go partial or intermittent, they're both the same thing, partial, intermittent, but intermittent has too many eyes in it, so I just say partial. Um, it's cheaper because you're not reinforcing every time. It's more practical because you can't reinforce every time. And it has a slower extinction rate, which means you can get a lot more behavior without reinforcing. Skinner once had a pigeon peck 10,000 times to realize it wasn't getting reinforced. Not a very bright pigeon. But anyway, um, so we divide partial into ratio, which is a number, and interval, which is a increment of time. Why I say increment, seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, so forth? Because if I say you reinforce every three times, that time is a number. So don't go by the word time. It's got to be an increment of time. And then so we have a fixed ratio, which is a fixed number. All touchdowns in football are 6 points. We have a fixed interval. Um, Programs on TV are 30 minutes, well, they're 22 minutes long because 8 minutes commercials, but it's 30 minutes. Your class is 50 minutes long. So that's a fixed interval. Then the most powerful, though, partial schedules are variable schedules, and variables change. It's like gambling. You can win two times and lose six times, and win once and lose four times and win twice. That's why gambling people gamble so much because it's partial reinforcement schedule. They get reinforced every once in a while, and um, they keep playing. Golf, you play. I mean, we're not talking about professional golfers, but people that play golf. They always talk about the one or two good shots. They might have shot 150, but they remember the two shots that they did that were good. And then variable interval is when time changes, right? The length of a phone call, the length of a plane flight changes. So um, if you're working on a commission So one week you sell a lot, next week you don't sell as much, you get different pay. So variable, it's like pop quizzes. You don't know when you're going to get them. So that's the four: fixed interval, set number, fixed, no, fixed. Sorry, I screwed you up. Fixed interval is a set increment of time. Fixed ratio is a set number. Variable interval is when the increments of time changes, and variable ratio is the number of time. The number changes. And that's five. Where's the sixth one? Superstitious reinforcement schedule. And a superstitious reinforcement schedule is a schedule you get reinforced, but you don't know why. You make something up. And athletes are fantastic for this. And for instance, you walk into your car and you're whistling Dixie, and you look down on the ground and there's a $20 bill. And so the next time you walk in your car, you start whistling Dixie, hoping for another $20 bill. That had nothing to do with the behavior. It's just like Wayne Boggs used to be a professional baseball player, and one day he went 5 for 5, and he figured out that before the game he ate fried chicken. He ate fried chicken before every game. The fried chicken had nothing to do with him going 5 for 5, but that's a superstitious reinforcement schedule. When you get reinforced and you don't know why, so you make something up. That's why it's called superstition, because most superstitions are like that, So, athletes have a certain thing they do before every game, and so that's a six, a superstitious schedule. And one of the main reasons for all these things, these schedules, is that we sometimes reinforce the wrong behavior. So we have to understand how to use the reinforcement schedules correctly. And what I mean by that, if you have a kid and you're pushing it through Walmart and the kid goes berserk and you buy it candy to shut it up, what are you actually reinforcing? You're actually reinforcing the kid to cry, because every time he knows, if I cry, I get candy. So is example then we have to do the correct reinforcement. That's what your homework is where I have a bunch of examples where you reinforce something, but you're actually reinforcing something else. So, for instance, if you have a kid that's causing trouble in class and you send the principal and the principal sends them as a runner to send messages to other teachers, the kid is getting reinforced for being bad in class. So then that's reinforcing. That's not punishment. So we have to know how to use the correct reinforcement. Now, Skinner believes in reinforcing good behavior and ignoring bad behavior. The only problem is, you ignore bad behavior, students think that condones. So if you have one person stabbing another person, you can't ignore it. You've got to act right then. So even though you really should reinforce good behavior, but the bad behavior depends on how bad it is, whether you need to intervene or not. And finally, in this chapter is that we've been talking about behavior modification is the best system ever, but it has some drawbacks. And actually, there's 7. There's a lapse of time between a class and a consequence. A lot of times, when a student gets something right or does something well in class, you reinforce them that when you're going outside, when you're walking outside, and say, "Oh, yeah, you did a good job today." Well, that's a lot of time between when they actually did the behavior and the reinforcement. This is why animals, you can't do that, because there's too many things that fall in between that they think they maybe get reinforced for. The second is that you can't, in a large classroom, you can't reinforce everybody. So there's a lack of reinforcement in large groups. Reinforcement changes. Remember in middle school, you had 8 different boyfriends or girlfriends. So I'm going to sit you next to Johnny to reinforce you, but now you don't like Johnny. So reinforcement changes. 4 is discovering reinforcement that is actually effective. I might give M&Ms, but if you don't like M&Ms, it's not going to work. So trying to find a reinforcement for everybody is not that easy. 5, and this is the one that's probably the one I test the most because it's the most common, is what do I get out of this attitude? What do I get out of this? That means that people, once they get reinforced, they expect to get reinforced. So once you start reinforcing in a classroom, you got to keep reinforcing. I remember one time I reinforced my daughter for cleaning up her room, and then next time I said, Sierra, clean the room. She said, what are you going to give me? She expects a reinforcement. What do I get out of this? You know, that's why I love when people in class say, I missed class. Did you do anything important? Of course we did. But the fact is that what do I get out of this to get reinforced? Also, from a psychological thing, we may reinforce the symptoms but not the cause. So if you're chewing on a pencil and I punish you for reinforcing or reinforce you for not chewing a pencil, you might replace it with another behavior because I haven't got to the issue, which is the anxiety of why you're chewing. So we sometimes reinforce a symptom but not the cause. And finally, we reinforce the wrong thing, and I just gave examples of that. We always tend to reinforce the wrong behavior sometimes. It's just like like I said in Walmart, you stop a kid, think you stop a kid from crying, but actually you reinforce them from crying. Okay, so this is the end of the chapter 5, part 2. If you have any questions, just let me know.